Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to my channel. My name is Paul, the Canadian Snowman, back here once again with another awesome video. Sorry I missed yesterday. Probably gonna miss another couple of days. It's Halloween week, and I'm kind of busy this week, so don't expect a video every day. Might not even get any this weekend. Just give me a heads up. But anyways, guys, what did the Romans think about race? I always thought about this back, like because the racism exist back then. I mean, obviously it had to have, but like I don't know, because you watch like old time movies, and everyone's interacting, everyone's thinking things cool. So I think it's not as a big deal. Maybe it wasn't a big deal or anything, or a deal at all back then, kind of thing. So I'm not really sure. So I think this would be quite interesting, to be honest. But anyways, let's jump in and check it out. Dun, dun, dun. All right. Invicta, guys. Invicta. Awesome.
In our last video, we talked about communication within the multi-ethnic Roman army. For me, it was an enlightening look into the nuanced interactions between people from our past. It also got me thinking more about the bigger picture of how different groups interacted in the past and what they thought of one another. This is particularly relevant in discussions of the Roman Empire, which ushered in one of the largest periods of cultural exchange up to that point. We know, for instance, how a cosmopolitan Rome bustled with people from across the known world, while the legions were filled with soldiers born thousands of miles apart. Given all this, I think it's quite natural to ask, what did the Romans think about different races? Let's find out. This video was sponsored by Magellan TV. They're an awesome documentary streaming service run by filmmakers with even related genres like science and crime, Okay, so right off the bat, it's important to point out that we're starting off with a bit of a loaded question here. When we ask, what did the Romans think about race, we're doing so based on our own modern framing of that term. Today, race generally gets equated to one's physical appearance, and in particular, skin color.
Right.
Humans have always had ways of distinguishing in versus out groups, and it just so happens that our own has its seeds in the 16th to 18th centuries with the age of exploration, the conquest of the New World, and the expansion of the transatlantic slave trade.
Damn.
It's during this era that the idea of race evolved to meet the dynamics of the times. Rapid developments in economics, politics, and science during the 1800s also played a particularly large role in further developing a new framework of race with which to understand the world. It's a complicated subject definitely worth exploring, but not one we have time to get into right now, other than to say that the idea of race we have today is a product of this recent shift. So what came before?
That's what I was saying, because the race today, and people obviously think about it a lot differently, because obviously like a recent past and stuff. So recent past, I mean, last like few hundred years. But back in like just Roman times, they don't have the same kind of history. It's not as, like, maybe not as well documented and known around the world back then. So they're probably have a totally different view of it. So this will be cool.
Well, as I already said, humans have always had a way to identify in versus out groups. Humans have also long had observable physical differences for thousands of years, which our ancestors were certainly not blind to. It's just that in the past, people had to rely on a more broad range of indicators for how to group individuals. Rather than the physical, this ended up being the cultural. So basically something more equivalent to our own idea of ethnicity. If you asked a Roman to guess someone's race, they would have a lot to consider. Who are their ancestors? What language do they speak? How do they dress? What are their mannerisms? Based on these answers, your average Roman could then slot them into different racial categories. This person is Greek, or Carthaginian, Gallic, German, Iberian, Egyptian, and so on. Each of these had their own set of expected cultural stereotypes, which could be both positive and negative. While it's impossible to discern how prevalent these ideas were amongst the general public, we can at least get an idea by looking at some surviving texts. Julius Caesar, for instance, described the Gauls as being superstitious.
So it seems like they're just instead of race, it was like a nationality or something like that. You're not calling someone like, black or white or brown or whatever. As it seems like, when you describe someone, you describe where they're from. And I guess if you call someone, I guess they're saying is, have you seen a white person or a black person? They would tell you a different area of the world, I guess. Just like, I don't know, like a black person, African. I don't know.
Independent. Julius Caesar, for instance, described the Gauls as being superstitious, independent, lazy, and prone to violence. The Carthaginians, meanwhile, were said to be clever, but devious. Tacitus has a lot to say about these groups. Of the Germans, he writes, quote, "They can exert their strength only by means of violent effort. They are less able to endure toil or fatiguing tasks, and cannot bear thirst or heat, though their climate has inured them to cold spells, and the poverty of their soil to hunger."
Wow.
He goes on to describe much more about their stereotypical culture, including their admirable monogamy and pure, simple living. However, it's important to take such descriptions with a grain of salt, as the author is setting them up as a rhetorical device to contrast against the decline of Roman morals as he perceived them. Another important thing to note here is that,
well, yeah, if you're from Rome and you're making like you're trying to like write the stereotypes of all the outside, places, you're gonna make your place look like they're awesome and whatnot, and you're probably gonna downgrade all the outsiders. So from everyone's view, like you're the top of the top. You're the place to be. You're the people you want to be like, kind of thing. So yeah, it makes sense. It depends on like is who you're getting your information from.
against the decline of Roman morals as he perceived them. Another important thing to note here is that Roman writers saw all outsider groups as alien. The pale-skinned Hibernian from the far north was no more bizarre than the dark-skinned Ethiopian from the far south, or the Indian from the distant east. All were lumped together as exotic and considered to have odd or mystical customs. One of the most prolific authors who discussed foreign cultures was Pliny the Elder. He writes about the world and some of his wild speculations about portions of it in his encyclopedic Natural History. Citing other authors, Pliny declares that Ethiopia spreads in a vast way below the Sahara, with different tribes inhabiting different parts of the land, and his descriptions of many of these tribes are strange and fanciful. Quote, "It is reported that in the interior, on the eastern side, there is a people that have no noses, the whole face presenting a plain surface. That others again are destitute of the upper lip, and others are without tongues. Others again have the mouth grown together, and being destitute of nostrils, breathe through one passage only, imbibing their drink through it by means of the hollow stalk of the oat, which there grows spontaneously, and supplies them with its grain for food.
What?
Some of these nations have to employ gestures by nodding the head and moving the limbs instead of speech." These descriptions grow increasingly strange with the telling. Quote, "The Troglodyte make excavations in the earth which serves them for dwellings. The flesh of serpents is their food. They have no articulate voice, but only utter a kind of squeaking noise, and thus are they utterly destitute by all means of communication by language.
Wow.
The Blemi are said to have no heads, their mouths and eyes being seated in their breaths. The Satyri, beyond their figure, have..."
Where is he getting this from? Is this like word of mouth? Like, you're on the streets and you're trying to write a book and you're like, you meet one person from this area and he's like, tells you these stories about these people, or extremely exaggerates something about a certain people, and then they take it to heart, and they write it down, kind of thing. Dang, this is crazy.
Their mouths and eyes being seated in their breaths. The Satyri, beyond their figure, have nothing in common with the manners of the human race, and the Hematopodes are a race of people with feet resembling thongs, upon which they move along by nature with a serpentine crawling kind of gait. I'm sure if we had more records from the past, we would be stunned by the sheer variety of descriptions from people from different races across the world. Given such variety, it should be no surprise that there would be an attempt to categorize the races of the world. In these efforts, it seems that some hypothesized why people from certain regions ended up with stereotypical traits. For a deep dive on this topic, I highly recommend you read De Architectura Book 6 by Marcus Vitruvius Pollio, who attempts to tie everything to climate. I'll read some highlights now. Quote, "Where the sun acts with moderate heat, it keeps the body at a temperate warmth. Where it is hot from the proximity of the sun, all moisture is dried up. Lastly, in cold countries, which are distant from the south, the moisture is not drawn out by the heat, but the dewy air, insinuating its dampness into the system, increases the size of the body and makes the voice more grave. This is the reason why the people of the north are so large in stature, so light in complexion, and have straight red hair, blue eyes, and are full of blood, for they are thus formed by the abundance of the moisture and the coldness of their country. Those who live near the equator, and are exactly under the sun's course, are owing to its power, low in stature, of dark complexion, with curling hair, black eyes, weak legs, deficient in quantity of blood. And this deficiency of blood makes them timid when opposed in battle, but they bear excessive heat and fevers without fear, because their limbs are nourished by heat. Those, however, born in northern countries are timid and weak when attacked by fever, but from their sanguineous habit of body, more courageous in battle. So, moreover, from the clearness of the atmosphere, aided also by the intense heat, the southern nations are more ready and quick in expedients, but the northern nations, oppressed by a gross atmosphere and cooled by the moisture of the air, are of duller intellect. That this is so may be proved by the nature of serpents, which in the hot season, when the cold is dispelled by the heat, move with great activity, but in the rainy and winter seasons, from the coldness of the air, they become torpid. Hence, it is not surprising that man's intellect should be sharpened by heat and blunted by a cold atmosphere. Though, however, the southern nations...
I must not be very smart at all, and that's probably why I don't get any of this, because I'm from up north. This is very interesting, though. Wow, okay.
are quick in understanding and blunted by a cold atmosphere. Though, however, the southern nations are quick in understanding and sagacious in counsel, yet in point of valor they are inferior, for the sun absorbs...
And just because once again, unless you don't know, I'm Canadian, but I live in the States. I live in the southern United States on the Gulf Coast, and I love the winters down here because you really don't get any snow here, and so I rarely ever wear a winter jacket. I might wear one a handful of times a year, when it actually gets to zero, around here. But in the summer, man, it's too hot for me. Middle of the summer, man, I rather hibernate inside. It is too hot for me. I guess it's because when you grow up north, you're not used to that climate, So when you go down south, it kind of feels overwhelming. And I guess I'm guessing it might be same thing if you're born, basically on the equator and down south, and then you go to far northern climate. That cold is a lot colder to you. The sun probably doesn't feel too bad to you, but then you go to that cold climate, and that's probably freezing. So I guess your body is just accustomed to how it's kind of, I don't know. As you grow up, your body just gets accustomed to your surroundings and whatnot, I guess, kind of thing. All right.
Absorbs their and sagacious in counsel, yet in point of valor they are inferior, for the sun absorbs their animal spirits. Those, on the contrary, who are natives of cold climates, are more courageous in war, and fearlessly attack their enemies. Though rushing on without consideration or judgment, their attacks are repulsed and their designs frustrated. Theories on racial origins, however, could justify ideas of racial superiority. Vitruvius, for instance, uses the traits of people at the climate extremes to argue why Rome's position in the center ensured that they had the best combination of all traits. Here's the relevant passage for context.
And just like the guy who said, this nation is this nation is this. Of course, if the Romans, if they're writing all this, they're going to put themselves in the center of the universe here and make themselves be in the perfect climate, the perfect kind of people. It's the same thing here. So if you're born above this line, then you have these good and bad traits, and below you have these good and bad traits. But over here, you get a picture of all the good traits, pretty much, right?
Context. Quote, "Since then nature herself has provided throughout the world that all nations should differ according to the variation of the climate, she has also pleased that in the middle of the earth and of all nations the Romans should be seated. On this account, the people of Italy excel in both qualities, strength of body and vigor of mind. For as the planet Jupiter moves through a temperate region between the fiery Mars and icy Saturn, so Italy enjoys a temperate and unequaled climate between the north on one side and the south on the other. Hence it is that by stratagem she is enabled to repress the attacks of the barbarians, and by her strength to overcome the subtlety of southern nations. Divine Providence has so ordered it that the metropolis of the Roman people is placed in an excellent and temperate climate, whereby they have become masters of the world." So with all these ideas about race floating around, how did they inform people's actions?
Stream live TV from 85 plus channels and save up to $500.
I'm sure it's just like anything today too, though. If you're from a certain area, you maybe looked down upon if you get together with certain races or whatnot. They kind of want you to, I don't know, you're kind of supposed to, I don't know, do a certain thing, and then I don't know, and if you do something else, maybe it's an upgrade. I don't know.
Well, as some might imagine, it could certainly be the cause of some xenophobia. We have numerous references to people being picked on for their accents, clothes, and manners. One example comes from the Roman poet Juvenal, who rants on about how the Greeks are effeminate, decadent corrupters of Roman virtue. A character from one of his satires states the following, quote, "Now let me turn to that race, which goes down so sweetly with our millionaires, but remains my special pet aversion, and not mince my words. I cannot, citizens, stomach a Greek Roman. Yet what fraction of these dregs is truly Greek? For years now, Eastern Orontes has discharged into the Tiber its lingo and manners, its flutes, its outlandish harps, its native tambourines, and the whores pimped out around the racecourses." So,
It reminds me of sports, like your favorite team and you talk bad about your least favorite team, your rival. And so you're going to pick on and pick out these little things that mean nothing about and make fun of your rival just because the small differences you blow them out of proportion when you make fun of your rival. That's just what it first comes to mind.
yeah, even if Marines and the whores pimped out around the racecourses. So yeah, even if this is just a character in a play, you can see where the conversation is headed. Some prejudices here are quite familiar to us. The idea of an immigrant people with a different language, strange music, and odd customs who poison a land that was once great. However, other prejudices seem quite farcical. For example, pants used to be a sign of the barbarian other, and no true Roman would be caught dead without their toga or tunic. Cicero himself had something to say on these pant-wearing foreigners in town. Quote, "Are you then hesitating, O judges, when all these nations have an innate hatred against and wage incessant war with the name of the Roman people? Do you think that, with their military cloaks and their breeches, they come to us in a lowly and submissive spirit, as these do, who having suffered injuries fly to us as suppliants and inferiors to beg the aid of the judges? Nothing is further from the truth. On the contrary, they are strolling in high spirits with their heads up all over the forum, uttering threatening expressions and terrifying men with barbarous and foreign language." There were even laws passed that dictated, quote, "Within the city of Rome, no man shall make use of pants." In later antiquity, during the period of the Great Migration, there was an even larger influence.
Man, it's so crazy how things have changed. Yeah. Like the Romans' way of dressing, I guess that just got destroyed. No one dresses that way anymore, even though like seemed like the center of the universe. For from obviously from their literature or whatnot, but yet the pants thing is a very big thing today, obviously. But yet they're not the ones who started it. They didn't start it, so it's kind of funny.
Influx of foreign influence from the Germanic people, which sparked some pushback against these perceived invaders. The Theodosian Code, for instance, contained laws against trousers, long hair, and certain types of shoes, which were associated with the Goths. Yet even small differences like this could inflame tensions between groups and bubble over into violence. For instance, when Alaric began raiding Roman towns in the 5th century AD, some Romans reacted in a panic by forming lynch mobs to target Goths within their own ranks. By and large, however, the Roman administration didn't care much for explicit racial discrimination. As long as you paid taxes and didn't cause unrest, you were fine by them. Speaking Latin was a great start to being considered amongst the civilized, and if you adopted Roman customs, you could more readily fit in socially, regardless of your background. Within a few generations, people who might once have stuck out could have begun to assimilate. Again, racial ideas were tied more to one's culture rather than one's appearance. It's for this reason that people from antiquity were none too picky with whom they captured as slaves. Rather than farms looking like something out of the American antebellum South, they would have instead been filled with all kinds of slaves who looked quite similar to their masters. As another data point regarding the idea of racial discrimination, I'd like to point to this map, which shows how Rome's own emperors hailed from lands across the empire. That being said, I don't want to pretend that there was no racism at all. There certainly was. It's just that it manifested in different ways than we might expect today. For example, on a more local level, people would sort out their own differences. In some places, this meant peaceful mixing of the races, and in others, it could be more violent. It all varied by location and time.
Yeah.
Just as today, though, large cities often saw the most mixing. In Egyptian Alexandria, for example, As many as 15 different languages were spoken in the city, with records of legal documents showing that such contracts were often drafted with multilingual audiences in mind. In addition, if you were to walk the streets, you'd see groups carving out their own corners of the city. Think Little Italy or Chinatown. So on the one hand, it seems like it's quite the cooperative society. Yet on the other hand, we know that Alexandria could often be a powder keg waiting to explode. It all really depended on the situation. Honestly, there's so much more I'd like to talk about when it comes to exploring race in the ancient world, and when it comes to things like defining what actually made one Roman, the struggle to maintain one's cultural identity, and how people we would today identify as black were seen by those in the Mediterranean. For now though, I think this episode will suffice as a primer on the subject, with the main takeaway being that race in antiquity was more about culture than appearance. I hope you found this just as fascinating as I have.
Alright, so more about culture. Okay, I definitely see that. So, as long as like you were seeing customs and everything, you were basically almost accepted as a peer. As long as you kind of have the same traditions and all that. It really didn't matter what your skin color was. I'm sure, like they said, in certain different circumstances, obviously it's going to make a big difference. And just like today, just like in cities back then, there's a lot more different kind of cultures, so people are used to it more, and it's not like a shocking kind of thing, you see it on a day-to-day basis. But yeah, if you go, I guess, out in like no man's land or wherever those countries are, that you don't get many outsiders. Those outsiders that walk through who are definitely maybe a different skin color or just a different, outfit or whatnot, they're going to stand out and probably be, picked upon and, stuff like that, because the people just don't know any better, and they just don't know that there's other people outside the world with different views, kind of thing. So anyways, yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope it was informative to you guys. I'm kind of curious on your thoughts below, kind of thing. Maybe the climate change, that I was talking about, or like it was more about culture back then instead of a skin color kind of thing. But I thought it was pretty interesting, and definitely makes sense, and that was pretty neat. So let me know if you thought the same thing, and hit that like and subscribe. I'd really appreciate if you did hit the like and subscribe, and I'll definitely catch you guys in future videos with more awesome, interesting stuff. But peace. I'm out of here. Go check out the playlist and have fun.